Picture this: a grand ballroom, awash in glittering chandeliers, tuxedos, and diamonds. A pregnant woman, trying her best to wear a brave smile, stands at the corner of the room as whispers swirl around her like a ravenous tide. Suddenly, the mistress arrives, slim, stunning, radiating confidence, and zeroes in on her target. She offers a snide remark, loud enough for all to hear, mocking the wife's blossoming belly and precarious situation. Gasps fill the air. Everyone expects the millionaire husband to defend his wife. Instead, silence reigns. Until the pregnant wife makes a move no one saw coming. In the blink of an eye, the entire room will witness one of the most shocking public downfalls anyone has ever seen. 4 years before that electrifying charity gala, the wealthy entrepreneur Joseph "Joe" Chadwick, heir to the Chadwick real estate empire, married Charlotte Rivers in an exclusive ceremony at St. Ignatius Church in New York City. Joe, known for his quiet demeanor and regal taste, took over the reins of Chadwick Realty upon his father's passing. Charlotte, once a rising interior designer from Boston, was swept up into a fairy tale romance when she accepted Joe's proposal. The wedding, rumored to have cost nearly $2 million, was the talk of the season. No expense was spared. The bride's gown was custom-made in Paris. The guest list included famed personalities like Elon Musk, Oprah Winfrey, and Bernard Arnault, all acquaintances of Joe's late father. The media coverage was relentless. Charlotte's hesitant smiles in the wedding photographs were explained away as bridal nerves. Yet, a few close friends worried something might not be quite right. After all, Charlotte had given up her bustling design career in Boston to relocate to the high-pressure world of Manhattan society to stand by Joe's side. In private, they weren't the picture-perfect couple society magazines made them out to be. Joe was always busy. Work followed him home. Phone calls into the late hours, weekend meetings, constant travel. There were also rumors that, behind his polished veneer, he was controlling, sometimes cold, and seldom showed the warmth one might expect in a loving marriage. But from the outside, they looked unstoppable. With Charlotte's knack for style and Joe's business acumen, they quickly became the philanthropic it couple for events, dinners, and fundraisers. Their story was that of a modern fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its hidden shadows. After they were married, Charlotte was immediately introduced into Joe's philanthropic network. The Chadwick name had funded hospitals, scholarship programs, and art museums for over half a century. Joseph's father, the late Warren Chadwick, had built not just a real estate empire, but also a reputation for giving back. It was his father's legacy that Joe was determined to uphold. More to honor him than for genuine altruism, or so Charlotte suspected. Over time, these posh charity galas and black tie events began to take a toll on Charlotte. She was expected to mingle flawlessly, host dinner parties, and decorate lavish penthouses for donor gatherings, sometimes with less than a week's notice. If anything went awry, Joe's disapproval was palpable. He never yelled or cursed. Instead, a cold glare or a silent drive home would leave Charlotte feeling like she was walking on eggshells. Despite her reservations, Charlotte quietly endured the demands. Part of her believed that once the frantic pace of their new life settled, Joe would open his heart to her. She had, after all, married him out of a combination of love, admiration, and the desire to make him proud. Behind closed doors, Joe occasionally showed tenderness, praising her event coordination, patting her on the shoulder for a job well done, or gifting her an elegant necklace after a successful fundraiser. These moments of warmth were fleeting, but they were enough to keep Charlotte hopeful. In those brief flashes of attention, Charlotte clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the man she had married was still present behind the cool veneer. She memorized the tone of his voice when he complimented her, the rare softness in his eyes, holding on to those crumbs of affection as if they were lifelines. But even in those fleeting gestures, there was an ache, an invisible imbalance. She often found herself watching the women at events, polished, effortless, magnetic, and wondered if she, with her Midwestern upbringing and carefully chosen designer dresses, truly fit in. Sometimes she would stand in front of her closet for too long, paralyzed not by indecision, but by the quiet fear that no outfit could make her feel like enough. It was at one such fundraiser, an event supporting foster care initiatives in Manhattan, that Charlotte first met Georgina Frost, an up-and-coming socialite with a trust fund rumored to hail from a flamboyant Texas oil dynasty. Georgina was tall, raven-haired, and wore sky-high stilettos that seemed more appropriate for a runway than a philanthropic soiree. She caught Joe's eye from across the room. Initially, Charlotte thought nothing of it. Joe was a people person, and often had to maintain pleasantries with big donors or their heirs. But over time, small rumors began to swirl. Friends in Charlotte's circle mentioned seeing Joe and Georgina together in the same corner of exclusive lounge, on multiple occasions, once without Charlotte. Staff at the Chadwick Foundation claimed Georgina had become an active volunteer, working late nights at the office, often coinciding with Joe's schedule. Charlotte tried to quell her suspicions, reminding herself that Georgina was involved in philanthropic endeavors just like everyone else in that circle. But the body language at dinners, Georgina leaning just a little too close to Joe, her laughter a bit too loud at his jokes, made Charlotte's blood run cold. The chill wasn't just jealousy, it was intuition. The same gut feeling that had warned her during arguments when Joe turned suddenly quiet, when his eyes didn't meet hers. She began noticing her own reactions, how her hands trembled slightly when Georgina entered the room, how her heart sank whenever Joe's phone buzzed late at night. She confided in one close friend, Naomi Jenkins, who had known Charlotte since college. Naomi was a lawyer who had seen enough marital disputes to recognize red flags from a mile away. "Don't ignore your instincts," Naomi warned over afternoon tea in Charlotte's penthouse. "If he's stepping out, you need evidence, you need to be prepared." Charlotte resisted, refusing to believe it could be that dire. She still wanted to trust her husband. The thought of betrayal was too heavy, too devastating to fully acknowledge. It meant rethinking everything: their wedding, the sacrifices she had made, the version of love she had constructed around them. So, ignoring the twinges of doubt, she put on a smile at each event, even if it grew more and more forced every time Georgina flitted into the room. Charlotte's world tilted on its axis one crisp autumn morning when she discovered she was pregnant. The morning's sickness and exhaustion, she had chalked it up to stress from event planning, until a quick pharmacy test changed her life. After a second test confirmed it, she decided to announce the news to Joe in a special way. She arranged candles and a small display of baby shoes in their living room, hoping to catch him in a rare moment of repose. Joe's reaction was subdued. He offered a polite smile, said something about the surprising timing, and then asked if they should visit the doctor right away. Charlotte felt her heart sink. She had expected an embrace, tears of joy, or at least a kiss. Instead, she received logistical questions, as if he were preparing for a business merger, not fatherhood. Still, Charlotte's joy was undiminished. She vowed to keep a positive spirit, hoping the baby would bridge the emotional gap forming between them. Maybe, she thought, fatherhood would awaken in Joe the warmth he so rarely displayed. True to form, Joe did schedule all the necessary doctor's appointments. He accompanied Charlotte, asked questions about vitamins and her diet, and even insisted on hiring a private chef to ensure she got the right nutrients. It appeared caring on the surface, but Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too methodical, like ticking items off a checklist. He rarely asked how she felt about the changes in her body, her hopes, or her fears. One evening, Charlotte was in bed reading pregnancy articles on her tablet when she heard Joe's voice drifting in from the hallway. He was on the phone. She strained her ears. "Don't worry," he said in a hushed tone. "We'll talk tomorrow in the office." The voice he used was soft, almost affectionate. Though he didn't mention a name, Charlotte's heart pounded with dread. She chose not to confront him. An inner voice told her the truth would come out on its own. Sometimes, illusions are easier to maintain than facing a painful reality. Around Charlotte's second trimester, Georgina's presence became impossible to ignore. She was everywhere, in the tabloids, on social media, often photographed attending society events where Charlotte was noticeably absent. Each photo felt like a needle to the heart. The confident smirk on Georgina's face, the casual elegance of her attire, it all screamed presence and dominance. Charlotte, confined to the shadows of penthouse windows and prenatal schedules, felt like she was quietly being erased from the narrative of her own life. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that Georgina had been named a special advisor to the Chadwick Foundation's new initiative on sustainable housing. Charlotte had never heard of such a role. More suspiciously, Georgina and Joe were spotted outside a boutique hotel, just having coffee. According to gossip columns, the strain of it all often brought Charlotte to tears at the most unpredictable moments. She would find herself crying over spilled cereal, over a baby sock without a pair, over a silence that lasted too long between her and Joe. The walls of the penthouse echoed back nothing, just the sound of her loneliness. Still, she clung to a semblance of dignity and told herself that Georgina was just another social climber latching on to wealthy men for attention. Joe assured her that Georgina's father, Randall Frost, was a significant donor, and Georgina's involvement was part of a broader philanthropic partnership. Charlotte, desperate to maintain her marriage and protect her unborn child, tried to believe him. But that gnawing sense of betrayal never left her. It lived in her chest like a slow burn, igniting whenever Joe pulled away first during a hug, whenever he glanced at his phone with a faint smile. She began to second-guess herself, to question whether the lack of intimacy was her fault. Was she too emotional, too sensitive, too needy now that she was pregnant? Throughout her pregnancy, Charlotte began noticing subtle changes in Joe. He started coming home even later, often with vague excuses. Weekend getaways and dinners that he claimed were work-related began to multiply. Meanwhile, Charlotte was left feeling increasingly isolated. She filled her time with prenatal yoga, reading about baby care, and meticulously designing the nursery in their sprawling penthouse. She obsessed over fabric swatches and mobile color palettes, not just out of joy, but because the act of preparing something tangible gave her a sense of control. In that carefully curated space, at least, she could believe she was building something beautiful, something that would last. One afternoon, alone and anxious, Charlotte decided to investigate. She rummaged through Joe's study and found a receipt for an expensive bracelet from Tiffany & Co., dated around Valentine's Day. She had never received any such gift. Later, she discovered a key card for a suite at the Park Hyatt. Panic fluttered in her chest when she realized the date on the card aligned with one of Joe's supposed business conferences. Her knees weakened as if the floor had dropped beneath her. For a long moment, she sat on the edge of his leather chair, the key card trembling in her hand, wondering how many lies had been masked as meetings. Grief-stricken and uncertain, Charlotte confronted him that evening. Joe looked at her calmly and insisted it was a misunderstanding. The bracelet he claimed had been for a loyal donor, an older woman he was trying to impress for a major foundation grant. The suite, he said, was booked for a visiting business associate. Charlotte knew the explanation was flimsy, but she had no proof to refute him outright. Weary and heartbroken, she turned again to her old friend Naomi for counsel. They met in Naomi's law office, away from prying eyes and the gilded walls of the Chadwick penthouse. Naomi was blunt. You need to protect yourself and your child. If he's cheating, you need a contingency plan. She laid out a scenario in which Charlotte would gather solid evidence of Joe's affair. If Charlotte could prove adultery, she would have a stronger position in any potential divorce settlement, especially crucial if she wanted to secure her child's future. But Charlotte balked at the idea of divorce. I'm pregnant, she said, her eyes brimming with tears. I can't just give up. Her voice cracked under the weight of everything she had tried to carry. The love, the expectations, the disappointment. Letting go wasn't just about ending a marriage. It felt like surrendering the last shred of hope she had clung to. Naomi took her hand. Sometimes letting go is the strongest thing you can do, she said gently. Just be prepared. A few weeks later, Charlotte received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. A woman's voice, trembling, identified herself as Beverly Chen, an administrative assistant at the Chadwick Foundation. Beverly was hesitant to reveal anything. At first, Beverly was hesitant, but she insisted she had vital information for Charlotte. They agreed to meet in a discreet cafe on the Lower East Side, far from the usual upscale Manhattan spots. Over a cup of chamomile tea, Beverly confessed she had seen suspicious emails between Joe and Georgina. Emails filled with personal sentiments and allusions to weekends away. She had overheard phone calls where Georgina referred to Charlotte as the clueless wife. And most nauseatingly, Beverly recalled Georgina saying, "I can't wait until the baby is born so we can ship it off to a nanny and have our fun." Beverly's eyes brimmed with tears, as if she couldn't bear to keep the secret any longer. "I know what it's like to be ignored," she whispered. "I couldn't watch you suffer without at least telling you the truth." Charlotte clutched her teacup, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and heartbreak. This was no longer speculation. Joe was having an affair, and Georgina wasn't just mocking Charlotte, she was ridiculing her unborn child. Armed with Beverly's revelations, Charlotte felt her resolve harden like steel. She was no longer the naive interior designer from Boston, nor was she the docile wife who blindly followed her husband to every social event. She was a mother, determined to protect her child. Charlotte decided to hire a private investigator, a recommendation Naomi had made months earlier. The investigator, a composed woman named Ellen Price, specialized in high-profile cases and was known for her absolute discretion. Within days, Ellen confirmed what Charlotte had already suspected. Joe and Georgina were renting a lavish condominium on the outskirts of Soho for their clandestine meetings. Ellen provided dates, times, photographs, and even recorded phone calls, enough evidence to shatter Charlotte's heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. But amidst the tears, Charlotte felt something unexpected: liberation. She no longer had to pretend. She had the facts and the means to protect herself and her unborn child. The next step was to decide how and when to confront Joe. More importantly, she had to do it in a way that left no room for him to manipulate her or tarnish her reputation. She needed to do it publicly, where Joe's carefully curated persona would work against him. As fate would have it, the Chadwick Foundation's annual holiday charity gala was just weeks away. This event was always a star-studded affair, with guests from the upper echelons of business, politics, and entertainment. The press coverage was immense. Cameras rolled from the moment guests stepped out of their limousines onto the red carpet. Charlotte typically dreaded such gatherings, but this year she saw it as an opportunity. She reached out to Naomi and quietly set a plan in motion. If Joe was going to flaunt his mistress in public, even if only through subtle gestures, then Charlotte would make sure the entire world saw the truth. And if Georgina dared to mock her at this event, pregnant belly and all, Charlotte wanted the power to strike back in the most controlled, strategic way possible. Over the next few days, Charlotte worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She arranged for Naomi's legal firm to finalize the divorce papers. Citing Joe's affair as grounds, she prepared a separate envelope containing the damning evidence. Photographs, transcripts, receipts, all of it. The crowning detail was the place and manner in which Joe would be served, under the brightest spotlight of them all. On the night of the holiday charity gala, the ballroom of the Waldorf Grand was transformed into a winter wonderland. Glittering icicle lights hung from the ceiling. Elegant ice sculptures adorned the reception area. White floral arrangements lined the tables. Guests arrived in tuxedos and evening gowns, smiling for the paparazzi. And Charlotte, now nearly 6 months pregnant, Charlotte wore a custom midnight blue dress that accentuated her growing belly with dignified elegance. She arrived alone. Meanwhile, Joe arrived in a separate limousine with Georgina. Though they did not walk the red carpet together, Joe was still cautious. The insiders knew they were a couple. Georgina wore a gleaming silver gown cut low at the back, turning heads with each step. If there had been any doubt about her sense of triumph, it was erased by the smug smile she gave to the cameras, clearly relishing her moment in the limelight. Charlotte remained composed, greeting old acquaintances and donors with practiced poise. She could feel Georgina's eyes on her from across the ballroom, but she refused to acknowledge it. She had a mission, and the night had only just begun. As the evening's program commenced, Joe went on stage to deliver a welcome speech on behalf of the Chadwick Foundation. He thanked the donors, praised the volunteers, and announced a new expansion project for affordable housing, no doubt something Georgina had a hand in orchestrating. He displayed his usual calm confidence, drawing polite applause from the crowd. The tension in the air was palpable. Charlotte sat at a front table, shoulders back, chin held high. Georgina, unabashed, positioned herself just 2 seats away from her. During a brief intermission, she sauntered over, a glass of champagne in hand. Lowering her voice so only Charlotte could hear, she sneered, "You really shouldn't be drinking anything but water in your condition, dear? Or is that baby your only claim to the Chadwick name now?" Charlotte's chest tightened, but she remained outwardly calm. "I'm perfectly fine," she replied softly, "and so is my child." Georgina gave a dismissive laugh. "We'll see how long that lasts." With that, she strode away, leaving Charlotte seething. But she wouldn't rise to the bait. She had bigger plans. The show truly began when Georgina took the stage as the newly appointed director of donor relations to introduce a musical performance. Flanked by a string quartet, she spoke into the microphone about the foundation's philanthropic spirit, throwing in pointed jabs at traditional families who face challenges they may not be ready for. Her remarks drew side eyes from those who suspected what she was implying. The crowd, a mix of oblivious socialites and keen observers, exchanged murmurs. Some saw through Georgina's facade. Others assumed she was merely commenting on broader social issues. But to Charlotte, each word felt like a knife. Her cheeks burned. Her heart raced. She could see Joe standing on the sidelines, arms crossed, looking vaguely amused. Or was it nervousness? The mistress was mocking the pregnant wife in front of everyone, acting as though she held some moral high ground. Little did Georgina know, Charlotte had one final scene to stage. After Georgina's speech, guests began to mingle again. High-profile donors approached Joe to discuss potential partnerships, while Georgina basked in her 15 minutes of fame. Charlotte's hand drifted to her belly. She steeled herself for what came next. Naomi, seated discreetly at a table near the back, made eye contact with Charlotte and gave a small nod. The moment had arrived. The master of ceremonies stepped forward and announced a special segment, a surprise presentation by Charlotte Rivers Chadwick. Polite applause followed, guests curious. Charlotte made her way onto the stage, microphone in hand. Spotlights illuminated her, revealing the slight tremor in her posture. But when she spoke, her voice was clear and unwavering. She began by thanking the donors and expressing her gratitude for the philanthropic legacy of the Chadwick family. Her words carried a sincerity that stood in stark contrast to, sharply with Georgina's smug monologue. Then, with a calm that belied the turmoil in her heart, Charlotte took a steady breath. "I would like to invite my husband, Joseph Chadwick, on stage for a brief announcement." The crowd clapped politely as Joe approached, his face carefully neutral. Georgina stood in the shadows, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. She had no idea what was coming. As Joe joined Charlotte under the lights, she gave a poised smile. "Joseph, for the past few months, we have supported each other through various philanthropic endeavors. At least, that's how it may have appeared." The crowd fell silent, sensing tension. The cameras rolled, capturing every moment. "But tonight," Charlotte continued, "I must speak a truth that weighs heavily on me. I stand here not just as your wife, but as the mother of your unborn child. And while I believed we were building a future together, it appears there's another story. One that involves betrayal, secrecy, and dishonor." The audience stirred. Some gasped, others glanced around, unsure how to react. In the corner, Georgina turned pale, her confidence beginning to waver. Charlotte reached into her clutch and pulled out a manila envelope. She held it up, her hands steady. "I regret to inform you, and all of our esteemed guests, that I have no choice but to file for divorce." She handed the envelope to Joe, who stood frozen, shock flickering across his features. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like an oncoming storm. "This envelope contains documented proof of Joseph Chadwick's affair with Georgina Frost," Charlotte declared. At the mention of Georgina's name, the cameras whipped in her direction, capturing her look of horror. "There are photographs, receipts, and statements that I'm sure will thoroughly explain why I've reached this decision." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Joe's jaw clenched. Georgina looked as if she might faint. Only Charlotte stood firm, tears glistening in her eyes but unwavering in her voice. "I will not be mocked or humiliated," she concluded, "and I will not allow my child to grow up in a home built on lies. This ends now." Pandemonium erupted. Some guests stifled their shock, others whispered with glee. A few cameras remained fixed on Georgina, who rushed forward and grabbed Joe's arm, her face twisted in fury. "You said you would handle this," she hissed, loud enough for the nearest microphones to pick up. Joe, visibly flustered, attempted to regain control. "Everyone, please. This is a misunderstanding," he began, but Charlotte turned to him, her gaze fierce. "There is no misunderstanding," she said coldly. "Not when there are hotel receipts, email correspondences, and pictures. If you want to lie, do it in court." Security personnel hovered around the stage, uncertain whether to intervene. Joe signaled them to stand down. Then Georgina, in a desperate attempt to save face, grabbed the microphone. "This is all slander," she shrieked, eyes blazing. "You're just a jealous, hormonal woman who can't satisfy." She never finished the sentence. The microphone cut out, courtesy of the quick-thinking sound crew, silencing the rest of her tirade. At that moment, Charlotte felt the baby kick, as if lending support from within. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaled the crisp air of the ballroom, and slowly descended the stage. The final image captured by news cameras was of Charlotte, hand resting on her belly, walking away with unshakable grace, while Joe and Georgina stood behind her in the throes of a very public unraveling. By the end of the evening, the gala was overshadowed by one headline: "Pregnant wife publicly serves divorce papers to millionaire Joseph Chadwick amid affair allegations." Social media exploded, tabloids had a field day, and outside the Waldorf Grand, paparazzi swarmed, clamoring for a picture or a statement. Charlotte didn't give them one. She simply got into her car and rode off into the night, finally, in control of her own story. Charlotte, escorted by Naomi, slipped into a waiting car and sped off, leaving the chaos behind her. Inside the limousine, Charlotte trembled. The emotional toll of that public confrontation weighed on her heavily. Naomi rubbed her shoulders gently. "You did what you had to do," she said. "Now let the lawyers handle the rest." Charlotte gave a small exhausted nod, her eyes glassy. Her heart pounded in the aftermath, the rush of adrenaline slowly giving way to raw, aching sorrow. The silence inside the car felt both suffocating and sacred, as though the universe itself had paused to let her catch her breath. That night, Joseph attempted to call Charlotte repeatedly, but she ignored every call. Georgina, too, had apparently been sending messages. Though Charlotte didn't bother to read them, she wouldn't stoop to that level. She watched the screen light up over and over, her hand hovering over the phone but never answering. Each missed call was a reminder of his desperation, but not repentance. That window had closed the moment he let another woman mock her child in public. For the first time in months, Charlotte felt a strange sense of liberation. She was free. Free from the charade, free from the lies. Even though her future was uncertain, she was no longer trapped in a loveless marriage ruled by deceit. By dawn the next day, every major news outlet and gossip website featured Charlotte's dramatic stand at the gala. Hashtags like Chadwick scandal and #Mistress mockery trended on Twitter. In an unexpected turn, the public largely sympathized with Charlotte. People admired her courage, especially given her pregnancy. Some news analysts who had once celebrated Joe as a generous philanthropist now slammed him for his duplicity. Georgina's social media accounts were flooded with vitriol. Commenters called her a homewrecker and worse. Even celebrities weighed in. Talk show host Wendy Williams, never one to hold back, remarked, "If you're bold enough to flaunt an affair, be bold enough to handle the fallout." Meanwhile, philanthropic circles quietly began distancing themselves from Georgina. Rumors swirled that her father, Randall Frost, was furious over her reckless behavior, fearing it might tarnish the Frost family name. The morning after, Joe appeared at Charlotte's penthouse unannounced, demanding to talk. The doorman tried to stop him, but Joe pressed forward. Charlotte, wearing a loose-fitting robe and cradling her baby bump, met him in the living room. Naomi was present as well, arms folded, ready to intervene if necessary. Joe's eyes were bloodshot. His hair was disheveled. "You ambushed me," he spat, voice quivering with rage, "at a charity event, in front of everyone. You humiliated me." Charlotte stood firm, her jaw tight. "I told the truth," she replied, voice steady. "You humiliated yourself the moment you took Georgina to bed." Joe ran a hand through his hair, pacing the floor. "We could have handled this privately. The donors are in an uproar. The board is calling for my resignation." "Consequences of your actions," Charlotte said coolly. "I owe you no sympathy." She watched him unravel, watched the cracks form in his composure. There was a grim satisfaction in seeing the mask fall away. proof that for once, he could not control the narrative. Joe changed tactics, softening his voice, pleading with her to reconsider. He promised to end the affair, to be a proper father to their child. But each word fell flat. Charlotte stared at him, tears swimming in her eyes, remembering the months of suspicion, the late-night calls, the hateful mockery from Georgina. She shook her head slowly. "I'm done," she said. "If you truly want to be a father, you'll do so under the terms I dictate, through my legal counsel." With that final statement, Charlotte walked away, leaving Joe in stunned silence. Naomi followed him to the door and firmly escorted him out. Once he was gone, Charlotte retreated to her bedroom and allowed herself a moment to break down. The tears came in torrents. She grieved, for the marriage she thought she had, for the love she had once believed could grow, and for the father her child might never truly know. She curled up on her bed, hands protectively over her belly, whispering apologies to the baby for everything it had already endured. In that moment, the pain wasn't just about lost love. It was about mourning the life she thought they were building together. Yet beneath the heartbreak burned a steadfast determination. Charlotte swore she would protect her baby from any future manipulations. If Joe wanted to be involved, it would be on her terms, not his. As for Georgina, Charlotte could only hope Joe would one day understand the difference between a fleeting affair and real companionship. But she no longer cared to witness that lesson unfold. Over the next few weeks, Naomi and her legal team worked tirelessly to negotiate the divorce. Joe initially resisted, refusing to settle with the full demands Charlotte proposed, particularly her request for sole physical custody. He insisted that he wanted equal rights to the child, claiming the baby was as much his as hers. Charlotte's legal team countered that his unstable behavior and proven infidelity were grounds to limit his parental involvement, at least until he could demonstrate genuine responsibility. Meanwhile, Georgina vanished from the social scene. Rumors circulated that her father had cut off her allowance and scolded her for bringing disgrace to the Frost family name. Some said she was hiding out in Europe. Others claimed she was staying at an upscale clinic in California, dealing with emotional stress. Charlotte paid no attention. Georgina's fate was no longer relevant to her life. That winter was especially cold. The swirling snow outside mirrored the swirling uncertainties in Charlotte's world. Yet despite the turmoil, she found solace in preparing for her baby's arrival. She busied herself with setting up the nursery, folding tiny clothes, researching strollers, and reading parenting books. Each fold of a blanket, each careful placement of nursery decor felt like a quiet act of defiance, a statement that she would build a loving haven for her child, regardless of the chaos outside. Sometimes, she would pause mid-task, overcome by sudden waves of fear, brief, breathless moments where she questioned whether love alone would be enough. In those silences, she would clutch a tiny onesie and remind herself, this child would never feel unwanted. Each small act reminded her that there was still hope, that joy could be found in the new life forming inside her. She also began reconnecting with her roots in interior design, taking on small projects for close friends. It helped reinvigorate her creativity and reclaim a piece of the old Charlotte, the woman with her own aspirations, not merely an extension of the Chadwick name. Designing spaces again reminded her of her own identity beyond the title of wife to. It was a lifeline to a self she feared she'd lost. Still, there were days when the weight of being both mother and provider pressed down on her shoulders. Days when even choosing fabric swatches felt like a test of her resilience. But she kept going, determined to rewrite her story with her own hands. Occasionally, she wondered if she had done the right thing by going so public with the divorce. Yet every time doubt crept in, she remembered Georgina's sneer and Joe's cold indifference. The truth had needed to be exposed. In a bid to salvage his reputation and the Chadwick Foundation's donor base, Joe scheduled a press conference at the Foundation's headquarters. He read from a prepared statement, apologizing to anyone who was hurt by my personal decisions, and specifically mentioned regret for my failures as a husband. Publicly, he pledged to remain on the board, but announced he would step back from day-to-day leadership duties, citing personal reasons. The apology received mixed reactions. Some applauded him for owning up to his mistakes. Others criticized him for not doing so sooner. Charlotte watched a snippet of the press conference on the morning news. She noted how carefully crafted his words were. Not once did he mention Georgina by name, nor did he address the baby directly. She found the statement lacking in sincerity, but at least the public pressure had forced him to acknowledge wrongdoing. That, at least, was a small victory in Charlotte's eyes. She allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had taken control of the narrative, and she had stood her ground for her child's sake. As she entered her 7th month of pregnancy, Charlotte's emotions began to oscillate wildly. She was elated with every kick and movement from her unborn child, but the nights were often sleepless, filled with anxiety about the future. Would she be enough for her baby? Could she provide the love and stability the child would need on her own? Yes, she had resources, but money could never replace emotional support. Sometimes, thoughts of Joe haunted her dreams. She remembered the early days of their relationship, dinner dates, walks along the Hudson, laughter over random jokes. She wondered if she had simply romanticized their union or if there had once been genuine affection they both failed to nurture. Even so, she knew those fleeting good memories did not excuse the betrayal. The man who had once brought her roses had also shattered her trust. In the nighttime stillness, she traced the curve of her belly and whispered reassurances, promises she would keep her daughter safe, cherished, and loved above all else. Loneliness became Charlotte's constant companion. At Naomi's suggestion, she joined a prenatal support group. Meeting once a week, she sat in a circle of expectant mothers, some unwed, some in rocky marriages, others blissfully happy. Oddly, it comforted her to hear other women's struggles. She realized that heartbreak could strike anyone, regardless of social standing. Over cups of herbal tea, she made new friends who reminded her that pregnancy, while challenging, was also a transformative journey. One of them, a soft-spoken musician named Felicity, was also estranged from her partner. The two bonded over their shared fears and hopes, forging a new sisterhood that transcended wealth or status. With every meeting, Charlotte felt her wounds begin to mend, her self-confidence slowly returning. One evening, as she dozed on the couch, Charlotte heard a knock at the door. Cautiously, she opened it to find Joe standing there, holding a small stuffed bear. She almost closed the door in his face, but curiosity held her in place. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Against her better judgment, she nodded. He stepped inside, glancing around the penthouse as though it had become unfamiliar. In a halting voice, he said he wanted to talk about co-parenting, to figure out a schedule and support system that wouldn't add stress to Charlotte. Charlotte listened carefully. For the first time, Joe expressed genuine concern for the baby's well-being, rather than the optics of the situation. He admitted regret for his actions, though he still stopped short of fully acknowledging the damage he'd done. Still, it was the closest thing to real remorse she had heard from him. She agreed to let him attend the final ultrasound appointment. But she made it clear, this changed nothing about the divorce proceedings. Joe left after half an hour, placing the stuffed bear gently on the coffee table, a small, possibly sincere gesture. At the ultrasound session, Joe joined Charlotte in the exam room. Awkward silence stretched between them until the technician began the scan. The rhythmic thump of the baby's heartbeat filled the space, and the screen flickered, revealing the outline of a tiny face. Charlotte felt tears spill down her cheeks. Joe, too, looked visibly moved, his eyes misting over. For one fragile moment, they were simply two people witnessing the miracle of new life. The swirl of legal battles, infidelity, and heartbreak faded into the background. When the technician handed them the printed ultrasound images, Joe gently touched Charlotte's hand. She didn't pull away. It was a flicker of unity, a reminder that despite everything, they shared a child. As they left the clinic, Joe offered to drive her home. She hesitated, then agreed. The ride was silent, but not tense. It was as if they both realized that how they handled co-parenting would shape their child's life forever. In the weeks that followed, Joe's lawyers reached out with revised divorce terms. Joe conceded to a substantial financial settlement and agreed to a structured visitation schedule, acknowledging Charlotte's right to full physical custody. Initially, a joint therapy session was proposed, specifically focused on co-parenting strategies. Though Charlotte was hesitant, Naomi advised her it could be helpful for establishing healthy boundaries. They attended their first session in a discreet therapist's office, far from paparazzi. Emotions ran high. Charlotte vented her sense of betrayal. Joe expressed guilt over letting their marriage deteriorate. While no miracles happened overnight, they began to see each other not just as adversaries in a legal war, but as the mother and father of a soon-to-be-born child who deserved stability and love. On a snowy morning in late March, Charlotte went into labor. The contractions struck like rolling thunder, and she rushed to the hospital with Naomi by her side. Joe arrived an hour later, breathless, anxiety etched across his face. Despite the tension between them, Charlotte allowed him into the delivery room, knowing that this moment transcended their broken past. After a grueling labor, a piercing cry announced the arrival of a baby girl. The medical staff gently placed the infant into Charlotte's arms. Through tears of exhaustion and joy, Charlotte gazed down at her daughter, tiny fingers grasping the air, eyes tightly shut. In that delicate, breathtaking instant, a profound wave of love surged through her, raw, protective, and unconditional. All the fear, the heartbreak, the long nights filled with doubt dissolved in the warmth of that tiny, perfect being nestled against her chest. Joe stood beside her, wiping tears from his own cheeks, carefully placing a hand on the baby's head. In that instant, the bitterness of the past year melted away, replaced by awe for the life they had created together. While they were no longer husband and wife, they had forged an unbreakable bond as parents. Charlotte didn't look at him as a partner anymore, but as the father of her child, flawed but necessary, a witness to this miracle. Once news of the baby's birth leaked, tabloids clamored for details. Speculation about the child's name, weight, and Joe's involvement ran rampant. Charlotte remained tight-lipped. She refused to give interviews, valuing her newborn's privacy above all else. Joe, too, stayed silent, releasing only a brief statement through his lawyers. "We are grateful for a healthy delivery and respectfully request privacy as we focus on our daughter's well-being." Georgina was conspicuously absent from the narrative. No statements, no social media posts. It seemed she had retreated completely, cast out by the high society circles that once welcomed her. In a world where reputation meant everything, Georgina had burned too many bridges. Whether she felt remorse or shame, no one could say. As Charlotte recovered in the hospital, Joe visited daily to see the baby. The tension that had once choked their every interaction was replaced by a measured civility. They talked about feeding schedules, diaper brands, and doctor appointments. Occasionally, laughter would break through, a soft reminder of simpler times. Charlotte began to realize that while she would always feel the sting of betrayal, the love she had for her daughter now eclipsed that pain. She chose to focus on the present, diaper changes, lullabies, and precious, quiet moments. Each sleepy sigh from Isabella, each little stretch of her tiny limbs reminded Charlotte that the most meaningful chapters of her life were just beginning. Joe, for his part, seemed genuinely committed to fatherhood. It didn't erase his past wrongdoing, but it was a step toward being there for his child. Months passed. Charlotte embraced motherhood with fierce devotion. She resumed taking on more interior design clients, balancing her time between caring for her daughter, whom she named Isabella, and rebuilding her career. She moved out of the penthouse, purchasing a cozy townhouse in the West Village. Though smaller, it was entirely her own, a testament to her independence. The walls of her new home bore no shadows of betrayal, just soft colors, fresh hope, and the gentle rhythm of new beginnings. Friends marveled at how she juggled single motherhood and a growing business. But Charlotte had discovered a strength within herself she never knew existed. The heartbreak from Joe's affair and the public spectacle of the divorce had forged her into a stronger woman. She cherished the quiet evenings rocking Isabella to sleep, finding in those tender moments the deep sense of fulfillment she had long craved. On weekends, Joe took Isabella to the park or on short visits to his residence. The arrangement went smoothly, thanks in large part to the therapy sessions and the clearly defined legal agreement. Charlotte sometimes felt pangs of sadness seeing Joe cradle Isabella, memories of what could have been drifting through her mind. But she resolved to keep the peace for Isabella's sake. Over time, they found a rhythm. While Joe remained somewhat distant emotionally, his love for Isabella was undeniable. He kept a nursery in his own home, stocked with everything she might need. Gradually, Charlotte softened, recognizing that fatherhood had opened a corner of Joe's heart she had never fully seen. Though the damage to their marriage was irreparable, the gift of a child offered them both a chance to cultivate a different kind of family dynamic, respectful, if not affectionate. Occasionally, Charlotte would hear rumors about Georgina's whereabouts. One tabloid placed Georgina in a luxury rehab facility in Malibu, reportedly dealing with exhaustion and mental health issues. Another gossip column suggested she was attempting to write a tell-all book about her experiences with high-profile men. Charlotte rarely paid such rumors any mind. She had won her own battle. Her dignity and her child's future were secure. One day, Charlotte stumbled upon an old photograph from that ill-fated gala. It captured Georgina mid-sneer, mocking Charlotte's pregnant form. For a brief moment, anger stirred again, but then she looked down at Isabella, peacefully napping in her bassinet, and let out a quiet sigh. Georgina was a relic of the past, a symbol of betrayal. Charlotte had moved on, had grown, and ultimately triumphed. No further vengeance or bitterness was necessary. Life gradually found its rhythm. Charlotte's business thrived. Her elegant, understated designs caught the eye of affluent clients seeking tasteful luxury. She also launched a YouTube channel offering home design tips and DIY ideas for mothers on a budget, determined to break the myth that style was only for the wealthy. Her authenticity and expertise quickly built a loyal following. Isabella grew rapidly, babbling her first words, taking tentative steps across the living room floor. Each milestone brought Charlotte a joy that words couldn't capture. She recorded it all in a private scrapbook, a keepsake of their mother-daughter journey. Some nights, Charlotte would gently lay Isabella in her crib and reflect on the night she stood before the world, pregnant and humiliated, yet unbroken. It felt like a lifetime ago. Nearly a year after the gala, Charlotte received an invitation to a charity event, this time for a pediatric hospital wing funded by the Chadwick Foundation. She had contributed design work for the children's play area. Though hesitant at first, she decided to attend. She wanted to show that she bore no ill will toward the cause, and to demonstrate her resilience. The event was smaller, more focused on the children and medical staff than on displays of wealth. Joe was there, cutting the ribbon with a local politician. He spotted Charlotte in the crowd and offered a small smile, a nod of recognition. She nodded back. The cameras didn't swarm this time. The tabloids had moved on. After the ceremony, Joe approached her to thank her for her design work. Their exchange was brief but respectful, a far cry from the explosive scenes of a year earlier. That evening, as Charlotte returned home, she reflected on how far she had come. She was no longer the timid wife overshadowed by her husband's ambitions. She was a mother, a professional, a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her strength, and her joy. She had faced betrayal and public scrutiny and emerged stronger with her self-worth intact. Joe, in his own way, seemed to be on a path of self-reflection. Whether it would lead to genuine growth or just another layer of pretense, Charlotte no longer needed to know. Her life's anchor was now Isabella, and nothing could undermine the happiness she had built for them both. The world Charlotte once inhabited, of red carpets, whispered betrayals, and staged smiles, was behind her now. In its place stood something simpler, softer, and far more real. It began not with commitment, but with curiosity. Months after Isabella's birth and the public unraveling of her marriage, Charlotte found herself ready to smile again. Not performatively, not politely, but truly. Her days were filled with lullabies, morning sunlight warming the nursery walls, and client consultations that reignited her creative spark. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt like her life wasn't something to endure. It was something to celebrate. Whereabouts? One tabloid placed Georgina in a luxury rehab facility in Malibu, reportedly dealing with exhaustion and mental health issues. Another gossip column suggested she was attempting to write a tell-all book about her experiences with high-profile men. Charlotte rarely paid such rumors any mind. She had won her own battle. Her dignity and her child's future were secure. One day, Charlotte stumbled upon an old photograph from that ill-fated gala. It captured Georgina mid-sneer, mocking Charlotte's pregnant form. For a brief moment, anger stirred again. But then she looked down at Isabella, peacefully napping in her bassinet, and let out a quiet sigh. Georgina was a relic of the past, a symbol of betrayal. Charlotte had moved on, had grown, and ultimately triumphed. No further vengeance or bitterness was necessary. Life gradually found its rhythm. Charlotte's business thrived. Her elegant, understated designs caught the eye of affluent clients seeking tasteful luxury. She also launched a YouTube channel, offering home design tips and DIY ideas for mothers on a budget, determined to break the myth that style was only for the wealthy. Her authenticity and expertise quickly built a loyal following. Isabella grew rapidly, babbling her first words, taking tentative steps across the living room floor. Each milestone brought Charlotte a joy that words couldn't capture. She recorded it all in a private scrapbook, a keepsake of their mother-daughter journey. Some nights, Charlotte would gently lay Isabella in her crib and reflect on the night she stood before the world. Pregnant and humiliated, yet unbroken. It felt like a lifetime ago. Nearly a year after the gala, Charlotte received an invitation to a charity event, this time for a pediatric hospital wing funded by the Chadwick Foundation. She had contributed design work for the children's play area. Though hesitant at first, she decided to attend. She wanted to show that she bore no ill will toward the cause, and to demonstrate her resilience. The event was smaller, more focused on the children and medical staff than on displays of wealth. Joe was there, cutting the ribbon with a local politician. He spotted Charlotte in the crowd and offered a small smile, a nod of recognition. She nodded back. The cameras didn't swarm this time. The tabloids had moved on. After the ceremony, Joe approached her to thank her for her design work. Their exchange was brief, but respectful, a far cry from the explosive scenes of a year earlier. That evening, as Charlotte returned home, she reflected on how far she had come. She was no longer the timid wife overshadowed by her husband's ambitions. She was a mother, a professional, a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her strength, and her joy. She had faced betrayal and public scrutiny, and emerged stronger, with her self-worth intact. Joe, in his own way, seemed to be on a path of self-reflection. Whether it would lead to genuine growth or just another layer of pretense, Charlotte no longer needed to know. Her life's anchor was now Isabella. And nothing could undermine the happiness she had built for them both. The world Charlotte once inhabited, of red carpets, whispered betrayals, and staged smiles, was behind her now. In its place stood something simpler, softer, and far more real. It began not with commitment, but with curiosity. Months after Isabella's birth and the public unraveling of her marriage, Charlotte found herself ready to smile again. Not performatively, not politely, but truly. Her days were filled with lullabies, morning sunlight warming the nursery walls, and client consultations that reignited her creative spark. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte felt like her life wasn't something to endure. It was something to celebrate. Those memories had been folded away, not erased but softened, like well-worn pages in a book she no longer needed to reread. Charlotte no longer lived in the shadow of betrayal. She had transformed pain into purpose, public humiliation into private strength. The townhouse wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary, a reflection of her journey. And Isabella, her greatest creation, was thriving. Each laugh from her daughter, each clumsy toddle down the hallway, was a daily affirmation that she had survived and built something beautiful from the rubble. Meeting Daniel hadn't rewritten her story. It had simply added a new chapter, one not marked by wealth, legacy, or headlines, but by quiet companionship and sincerity. He didn't try to fix her. He simply showed up, consistently, with open eyes and a listening heart. In his presence, Charlotte felt seen. Not for her past, not as a former socialite or a scandalized wife, but as a woman still capable of being cherished. Their future was unwritten, and that was okay. Charlotte had learned that life's most meaningful turns often arrived unannounced, gently, like sunlight through nursery windows. It didn't need fanfare. It didn't need approval. It only needed truth, and softness, and time. She took one last look at her daughter sleeping so soundly, then tiptoed from the room. Downstairs, Daniel was making coffee. He smiled when he saw her. Nothing performative, just real. She smiled back, not out of politeness, but because the peace in her heart made it impossible not to. It was the kind of smile born from quiet healing, from the kind of comfort that doesn't shout but stays. For the first time in a long time, Charlotte didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's story. She was the author of her own narrative, resilient, present, and hopeful. And as the morning began in earnest, with the sounds of a waking city outside and a new day within, she felt something simple, profound, and true. She was home. So, our story has finally come to a close. And if you're still here, our dear and wonderful friends, it means this story touched your heart, maybe in a quiet corner, maybe in a place you didn't expect. So let's take a breath together, you and I, and reflect on what Charlotte's journey can teach us. Not just about heartbreak, but about healing. Her story isn't just about betrayal and pain, it's about rising from those ashes with grace. She reminded us that even in our darkest hours, we are not powerless. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, said Seneca, and Charlotte's life proved it. The pain was real, yes, but so was the strength she found within herself. How many times have we stayed in something? An idea, a job, a relationship, because the unknown felt scarier than the hurt we already knew? Charlotte's courage shows us that the most radical act of love we can offer ourselves is to choose peace over pretense. Her transformation wasn't loud. It was quiet, tender, in the glow of her daughter's smile, in her decision to start fresh, in Daniel's presence, not to save her, but to walk beside her. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. The affair wasn't the end of her life. It became the beginning of her own authorship. So if you're here, perhaps you too have stood at the edge of heartbreak. And if this story gave you a glimmer of hope, or even a moment of comfort, then we've shared something meaningful. Like, share, subscribe. Not just to support this channel, but to be part of a space where stories remind us we are not alone. And healing? It doesn't happen in applause. It happens in morning light, in lullabies, in choosing yourself every single day. Thank you for being here. And wherever you are in your own story, may you find the strength to say, this is not the end. This is just my next beginning.